Hi there, my name's Anna and welcome back to my art channel. So in today's video I am actually redrawing the same motif I drew or painted before. This is the original one I did about a year ago. It's in coloured pencil and I'm very happy with the result. Of course it's very refined as it is done with coloured pencil. Don't like the background as much, but yeah, it was a perfectly fine drawing. I didn't redraw it because I wasn't happy with it. I just thought that little crocodile was so cute, so I had to paint him again in my sketchbook. And this time I used watercolors, and yeah, I think he turned out just as cute. Maybe not quite as refined as the other one, but of course it only took me a fraction of the time that the other drawing did. So yeah, this is the drawing I'm showing you today. I hope you enjoy watching the process. Let me know which one you like more, and you can go back to the other video and watch me drawing the same crocodile in coloured pencil. Yeah, so on to the painting process. A lot of the time when I'm painting in my sketchbook or when I'm using watercolour in general, I like to mask off the sides of my drawing. It also helps to keep the page fairly straight when I use a lot of water, so it doesn't warp as much, but it also gives me a nice border at the end, as you can see, maybe a little bit on the left hand side there with a recent gouache drawing. It gives me a nice white border and it's just really rewarding when you peel it off. You can see I am sketching out my little crocodile now. I'm just using a mechanical pencil, and the little rubber I have on the side is a very fine little rubber that's basically nearly as fine as a pencil, so I can really erase just those areas that I need to erase. And yeah, like I said, I'm drawing the same crocodile for the second time. I don't know if it was any easier for me the second time around. Possibly it was. And I must say there's nothing wrong with drawing the same thing a couple of times. There's so many mediums we can use. And of course it really lets us practice and really dive into a subject more if we paint it or draw it a couple of times. And yeah, like I said, this crocodile is just too cute. I really felt like drawing him again. And because I was doing this in my sketchbook, there was a lot less pressure on me to do this perfectly. I'm just kind of indicating a lot of those scales. If you want to get something like this very realistic, you do have to kind of draw every single scale individually, more or less. But with watercolor, it's slightly easier to just indicate things than it is with colored pencil. And here you can see I'm painting in the background. I'm using paint wet onto wet, and I just painted that in really quickly. And now I'm starting off painting my subject. And I'm starting with very light washes of paint. I'm using different shades of greenish brown and grey, and I'm just starting very light, and then I can build slowly with watercolor. I'm starting to darken some areas, and now I've painted in the yellow eye. And I'm using a round brush. This one is fairly small, so I can add a lot of detail. It's a watercolor brush. And as you can see, I'm just moving around the crocodile, always adding layers of paint, sometimes larger areas of paint, and sometimes I'm just adding in little details already. And as I go, I get always darker and more defined. I'm using a very dark neutral mixture here for the opening of the mouth and for the really dark shadows between the teeth. I think there might have been a bit of Payne's grey in that mixture, but you can also achieve the same dark colour by mixing brown and ultramarine blue. adding some detail around his eyes. And of course, the more detail you start adding, the more realistic this little fellow starts to look. Increasing the contrast there between the teeth, adding some more dark paint. And doing the same around the eyes. And whenever you've put down some paint and you don't want to just have it sitting in one area, you can use a clean brush with a little bit of water and kind of smooth that paint out. So you can get an even transition even if you're not working wet into wet per se. And all of these scales are different colored. Some are more black or grey, others are more brown or green. And I'm kind of indicating the shape of the scales and adding some little details to the scales as well. I can't remember exactly how many hours it took me to do my colored pencil drawing, but it was certainly more than 3. I'd say between 4, maybe 4 and 6 hours. And I think this one took me a maximum of 2 hours. Maybe a little less, so yeah, that definitely makes a difference. Of course, with watercolor it's slightly harder to control than it is with colored pencils, and you can't really reach the same perfectly smooth and refined result, but you can get pretty close and very realistic with watercolor as well if you take your time and add a lot of contrast, detail and layers. So you can get a fairly similar result, and in general I'd say probably quicker. So watercolor of course is reactivatable, but that doesn't usually mean that you're going to mess up layers underneath, depending on what you're trying to do, because if you're adding layers of detail you're usually not using a lot of paint and you won't really reactivate what's underneath. So you can layer to your heart's desire as much as you want, really. And then of course you can blend out areas that are over or underneath each other if you want to, by just using a bit more water and smoothing things out with your brush. So it is a very versatile medium. And these little scales on the back of the crocodile, some of them are just like little pebbles, and the ones on the neck I kind of drew out a little bit more symmetrical. But when I was drawing that initial sketch I didn't feel like to go to too much length, so the scales of course are nowhere near perfectly the way they are in the original reference photo. But I think they're close enough to fool somebody who's not seeing the original reference photo, so it's all fine. Adding little dots of paint, smoothing it out a little bit. The texture on his face, I'm not drawing in as much detail as those very prominent scales on the back of him. And that's the beauty of watercolor, you can kind of create texture without having to draw every single little line of what you're trying to show. And as you can see, he's grown always darker, and I've added more detail and more contrast. And yeah, that's what you really need, contrast, to make something look realistic. So you have to have fairly light areas and you have to have areas that are decently dark. Adding a little bit of texture to the eye. He has a very interesting design in his eye on the reference photo, and I didn't copy it exactly. That would have been too much work. Glazing a little bit of color over some of those scales. Adding some more detail and dark color on his snout. And he looks fairly realistic already. I'm nearly finished at this point. I'm just adding some more details, and then I come back in with some white gouache to add some highlights on areas where I didn't preserve enough white of the paper. And yeah, it's a really handy way to make your life easy, using white gouache at the end for highlights. So I hope you enjoyed this painting process. Remember to give me a thumbs up and to subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you again soon in one of my next painting videos. So take care and bye bye!